There is a kingdom.
Hey, and welcome to this week's coaching video for small group leaders at Dayspring. This coaching video is designed specifically for those who host or facilitate an off-campus small group, and this particular coaching video accompanies the sermon that's preached on Sunday morning, September the 29th. So, if you're a small group leader hosting a small group off-campus that accompanies the September 29th sermon, then you're in the right place. You're going to need a few things with you as we move along, because this video is designed to help you facilitate that small group lesson. Hopefully it's going to make it a little easier for you to do your job. Here's what you're going to need with you as we watch this video. First of all, you're going to need your copy of the handout. You should have received this already. It's an advanced copy of the handout that goes with the Sunday sermon. You should also need, you're going to need a pen or a pencil, something to write with, and you're going to need about 20 minutes of uninterrupted time as I coach you through this video. Now, the sermon from Sunday is going to be in John chapter 9, and it's a miracle that Jesus does by healing a guy who's blind. Now, this small group lesson is going to accompany that. There's a funny thing that happened recently. It involves Steve Wilhite. I don't know if you know that name, but 25 years ago, Steve Wilhite invented, if you will, he created an electronic file called the GIF file. If you've been around electronic stuff, you may be familiar with that, but a GIF file is just a kind of electronic file. What's funny is that now, 25 years later, there's kind of been this kind of funny debate that's come up as to how that file is pronounced. It's GIF. Is it pronounced GIF or is it pronounced GIF? So is it a hard G like gift, or is it a soft G like gentleman? Well, there's been this debate about that, and a lot of people have weighed in, and a lot of people have spoke, definitively as to whether it's a GIF or a GIF. What's funny is that after a lot of this debate ensued, and by the way, even the White House released a thing saying that it's pronounced GIF. It's a hard G. The funny thing is that Steve Wilhite himself, I guess recently, just kind of got tired of all the debate and the talk about it. He finally issued a formal statement clearing up the issue once and for all. And here's his formal statement. You ready for this? He said, and I quote, "It's a soft G, pronounced GIF." End of story. All right, so there you have it. The great GIF pronunciation debate has been settled, or so you would think. It's funny, even though Wilhite, the creator of the GIF file, has spoken definitively, it's a GIF. There are a lot of people who still say, no, it's a GIF. And here's their argument. The reason it's a GIF file and not a GIF file is because pretty much that's the general consensus. Even the White House thinks it's a GIF file. So since so many people, the consensus is it's GIF, there are a lot of people who say, then that's what it is, despite the fact that the creator of the GIF file has said the way it ought to be pronounced. Now, here's why I'm telling you that story and that illustration. It really illustrates a lot about this small group lesson you're going to lead. Because here's why. You're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 28, verses 16 through 20. It is a very well-known passage. We call it the Great Commission. It's so familiar that we have a nickname for it, the Great Commission. The Great Commission makes it clear why God has us on this earth, at least in terms of what our purpose and mission is. We have a very clearly defined aim and mission given to us by our Creator. The one who made us has told us, here's what you're supposed to be doing while you're on this earth. Your aim is to be a witness of God. I mean, even before the fall, think about this, even before the fall of man, God said what you were to do is to bear my image and my likeness. Now that the fall has taken place, there's even a greater intensity to this, to being a witness and a reflection of God, to make known who God is. So God himself has said in Matthew chapter 28, verses 16 through 20, here's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to make disciples. That's your purpose while you're on this earth. But here's the deal. Getting back to the illustration about the GIF file. It seems as if we've kind of rewritten our purpose and our intention of how we live this life, and it seems as if our God ordained purpose of being his witness and making disciples, it's almost like we've reprioritized our own lives, and that's kind of fallen by the wayside. despite the fact that our Creator has spoken definitively about it. Okay? So that's what this small group lesson is all about. Hopefully that'll kind of help you understand where you're trying to lead people. And you may even share that illustration yourself as part of the small group lesson, okay? So get your handout ready. I'm going to talk you through it point by point. There are 7 points. I'm just going to kind of make sure that you know what's going on here, all right? Look at point number 1. That's an easy one. Point number 1, you just recap what you heard Sunday. You recap the sermon. You recap any notes that you took, which means it would be wise of you to take some notes, especially if there are some main points that are given, which there will be. Write those down and recap those as a group. Kind of hash it out. And listen, this part of the small group lesson may go so well you almost can't stop that train. And if so, that's okay. If good constructive things are happening, if you're teaching one another, let that happen. So discussion point number 1, recap what you heard. All right. Now from discussion point 2 on down, it's going to kind of do a lot of teaching, your handout is, and trying to coach people through some of the things that I just shared with you in those opening statements. Look at discussion point number 2. It says, one of the most endearing parts of the story of this blind man, that's the one that you're going to be reading and recapping in discussion point number 1. One of the most endearing parts of his story is his testimony in verse 25. And that's when he just said, when people are quizzing him, how did you get your sight? You know, and they're grilling him about this. And finally he says, look, all I know is this. I used to be blind, now I can see. All right? And this is a reminder, and it shows you, I'm reading your handout. This is a reminder that God has commissioned us to tell our stories, to be witnesses, not to be secret about the fact that God has changed us, okay? So, point number 1, you're recapping the John 9 passage. Point number 2 is kind of a carryover. You're talking about this great statement he makes, which is a reminder to us that we've been commissioned to be witnesses. Now, look at discussion point number 3. Read our commission to be his witnesses in Matthew 28, verses 16 through 20. So this is when Matthew 28 makes its appearance to your small group. The Great Commission, where Jesus said, go into all the world, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded you. All right? Now, that's the Great Commission. Now, discussion point number 4 on your handout, look at it. This is a little bit of a teaching moment, not so much a question. But look. It says in the Greek language in which Matthew writes, the only command in this verse is make disciples. Now, let me clarify what that's saying. When we read our Bibles, obviously we're reading it in English. That's a translation of what Matthew would have written in Greek. And maybe that's a little history lesson for you that maybe you didn't know, that the New Testament documents were written in very specific, Greek dialect. And fortunately, we now have those original manuscripts translated into hundreds of different translations, one of which being English. So now we can read the Bible. But when Matthew wrote it in the specific dialect of Greek that he wrote, the verb tenses are very, very specific. And when you look at verses 16 through 20, surprisingly, the only verb that's written in the imperative, which means a command, is the verb make disciples. Now, you're looking at your English translation and probably thinking, isn't go, isn't that a command? Actually, it's not, okay? And this is our point. Look at your handout. In the Greek language in which Matthew writes, the only command in this verse is make disciples. The other verbs are participles that describe how we make disciples. So the other verbs, going, baptizing, teaching. That's how Matthew wrote them. So here's a good paraphrase of the Great Commission, considering the specific verb types used in the Bible, and it's there on your handout. Here's the command. Here's our commission. Make disciples by going about your daily business, inviting people to believe, and then showing them how to follow Christ. So there are 3 participles in this Great Commission, and a participle is simply a verb that sounds like an adjective, okay, or a verb that sounds like a noun. 3 participles, going, baptizing, and teaching. But the command of God as to how we live our lives, make disciples. So here's what Matthew 28 is telling us, okay? As you go about your business, wherever you happen to be going and whenever you happen to be going there, whether that's work, school, home, wherever you go, about your daily business. Find yourself inviting people into the kingdom, which is where that baptizing comes in. That would have been a New Testament initiation. For somebody to be baptized meant that they were agreeing and accepting the message. So as you're going about your business, be inviting people into the light of the gospel. And then as they receive it, you're teaching them, which means modeling for them what it looks like to follow Jesus. So here's a good teaching point that you might break out that's not on your handout here on discussion point number 4. This will be interesting to you. That in the Bible, and again, we're talking the Greek language, kind of the original languages of the New Testament, the words obey and observe, think about this, obey and observe, those two words were used sometimes interchangeably as one and the same, which means this: for someone to watch you live your faith is how they learned to obey that faith. Do you see what's going on here? When we make disciples, which involves going about our business, that's a mindset thing. Inviting people into the gospel, which is an evangelism thing, but also teaching them, which means we're allowing them to see us up close, to watch how we live out our faith, and to do faith like we do our faith. So do you hear what I'm saying there? The Great Commission means that to make disciples, we do that wherever we find ourselves. We invite people into the kingdom, but then we show them, we bring them alongside us and say, hey, watch me live out my faith. Let me give you some verses to write down that really are a good illustration of how we're to model our faith. Write these down. 1 Corinthians 11, verse 1. Listen to what Paul, the great discipler, look at what he says there about how discipleship looks and how making disciples looks. 1 Corinthians 11, verse 1. Here's another one. Philippians chapter 4, verse 9. Philippians 4:9. Again, listen to how Paul talks about what is involved in making disciples. Here are a couple of other really good verses. As Paul discipled Timothy, think about this. 2 Timothy 1, verse 13. Look that one up. 2 Timothy 1, verse 13. And then also look up 1 Timothy 4, 16 and 17. 1 Timothy 4, 16 and 17. And again, we're talking about what it means to make a disciple and the how of making the disciples. So 1 Corinthians 11, 1, Philippians 4, 9, 2 Timothy 1, 13, 1 Timothy 4, 16 and 17. And again, here's why I'm giving you all of this. The command is make disciples. That's the what of the Great Commission. The how of the Great Commission is found in those participles: going, baptizing, and teaching. As you go about your business, inviting people into the kingdom, and as they receive the gospel, then you disciple them, showing them how you do faith. And that's where those verses I just gave you came into play. You might find them helpful, you might not, but as people talk about discussion point number 4, some of that stuff might be helpful. All right? Look at discussion point number 5. In discussions point 5 and 6, it's going to get really personal and really practical. Look at number 5. Think through where you will be, quote unquote, going the next few days. As you go about your business, where are you going to be the next few days? What are the places you're going to be going? Now look at what it says. Think specifically of 2 or 3 people who you know that you'll be spending time with over those next few days. Specifically people who have not started following Jesus. So you're asking your group members, as you go about your day-to-day business over the next few days, who are you going to be spending time with who's not a follower of Jesus? And you're going to see in discussion point number 5 that they have the chance to write those names down or initials down. So in other words, really think about this. Who are you going to be around as you're going about over the next few days? Who are you going to be around who has not embraced the gospel? Jot those names down or those initials down, okay? Now from there you move on to discussion point number 6, and we're pressing it one step further. In discussion point number 6, you have 3 passages that your group is going to look at together, and you need to look at them one at a time, okay? And after each one is read, here's what you're going to do. Everybody in your group, after each one is read, you're going to write down one thing, specifically one thing that describes what's necessary for us to share the gospel in an effective way, in such a way that it will be received, okay? So based on these verses, what does this teach us about effectively accomplishing the task of making a disciple, all right? Now you've got three things written down there on your handout, or three passages. Ephesians 2, 8 through 10, 1 Peter 2, 11 and 12, and then Colossians 4, 2 through 6. So with your group, have them read one at a time. So like you'll read Ephesians 2, 8 through 10, and then you'll say, okay, so according to this, what's involved in us being an effective witness, all right? And in that one, you guys will write down something like, doing good things, doing good works, and people seeing that. All right, so that's kind of your answer there. 1 Peter 2, 11 and 12. Again, you'll read that one, and then there should be a response there, something about living a godly life, something of that nature. The Colossians 4 passage should involve prayer, and praying, involving people in praying for us as we seek to witness to the people in our lives. So you're going to have three things there that really help you see what's involved in being a faithful witness, which brings you to point number 7, and this is where the rubber hits the road, and this is where it gets really personal and practical. Look at number 7. It says, look at your list of what's necessary for effective witness. That's those three things you just wrote, as you also look at the names that you listed above. So are you connecting the dots here? Listen, you're trying to connect dots with people. You've already acknowledged you know people who don't know Jesus. And now you're seeing what is involved in being a faithful witness. Let's connect those dots. God has people in our lives. We know what we need to do. That's why your handout finishes with a simple statement. Make disciples. All right? So this is your small group discussion for this week. It's a follow-up on the fact that we have a story now. We used to be blind, but now we can see. And Jesus has commanded us to make disciples, which means wherever we're going to end up going this week, we're to be about the business of communicating the gospel and showing the gospel and inviting people to embrace it. And as they do, we say, hey, follow me as I follow Jesus. All right? Hey, thanks for tuning in and watching this. I hope it helps you as you facilitate your small group. I hope your group has great discussions, and I hope this does something in your hearts that helps you to follow Jesus better in the command that He's given us, the commission He's given us to make disciples. God bless you.